Serena Johnson never expected her peaceful evening to take a dark turn. The gas station's fluorescent lights buzzed softly as her car idled at pump number 3. The quiet hum of the town was interrupted by the distant rumble of motorcycle engines, a sound that had become more frequent lately in Riverwood Falls. As the fuel gauge steadily climbed, Serena remained vigilant, her senses honed from years of military service. Her time as a military police officer had taught her to read people, to gauge threats, and to act decisively. Tonight, those instincts would be tested again. The roar of the motorcycles grew louder, and soon 2 bikers from the Ironclaw MC rolled into the station. Their arrival disrupted the calm, their presence imposing and calculated. The taller of the 2 had a rugged face, marked by a jagged scar running from his temple to his jawline. His companion, shorter but broader, carried an air of menace in his deliberate movements. Their leather jackets bore the Ironclaw emblem, a fierce iron claw clutching a lightning bolt. The symbol had become synonymous with intimidation and control in Riverwood Falls. The townspeople whispered about the gang's increasing influence, but few dared to confront them. As Serena finished refueling, she noticed the bikers approaching her. Their steps were unhurried, their expressions smug. The taller one, Scarface, spoke first, his voice dripping with condescension. Well, look what we have here, he drawled. Don't see many like you around these parts. His companion chuckled, a raspy laugh that grated on Serena's nerves. You sure you're in the right place? Riverwood Falls isn't exactly welcoming to outsiders, the shorter biker added, his eyes glinting with mischief. Serena met their gaze without flinching. Her calm demeanor betrayed none of the tension simmering beneath the surface. She had faced worse threats on the battlefield and knew that fear was a weapon her opponents sought to wield. Is there a problem? She asked, her voice steady and composed. Scarface smirked, taking a step closer. No problem at all. Just looking out for the town's safety. You never know who might need a little protection. We're always happy to help. The veiled threat hung in the air like a dark cloud. Serena recognized the tactic immediately. Gangs like the Ironclaw MC thrived on fear, preying on vulnerable communities to assert dominance. This town is already safe, Serena replied, her tone unwavering. Her eyes never left Scarface, tracking his every move. The shorter biker sneered. Safe. We've heard some places aren't so lucky. Accidents happen. People get hurt. But with us around, things run smoothly. Serena's gaze hardened. She knew their type. Predators who exploited others to feed their own egos and fill their pockets. They didn't expect resistance, especially from someone like her. Let me guess, Serena said, her voice cutting through the tension. You think you can come into this town, threaten people, and make them pay for protection? Too bad. That's a childish game. Scarface's smirk faltered. What kind of game are you playing? He growled. Serena replaced the fuel nozzle and turned to face them fully. No game. Just a warning. If you want to cause trouble here, find another town. I won't stand by and let you destroy this one. The air grew thick with tension. The shorter biker's hand drifted toward his jacket pocket, a telltale sign he was armed. Serena's muscles tensed, ready to act if necessary. But before the situation could escalate, the store's door swung open. Good evening, Serena, called out Tom Willis, the gas station owner. His cheerful voice broke the oppressive atmosphere. Serena glanced at the bikers one last time before walking past them into the store. She knew this wasn't the end. The Ironclaw MC wouldn't back down easily. Inside, Tom stood behind the counter, his hands trembling as he rearranged items. He looked relieved to see Serena. Everything okay out there? He asked, concern etched on his face. Serena nodded. For now. But those two aren't just passing through. They're trouble. Tom sighed, his shoulders sagging under the weight of worry. They've been hanging around all week, asking questions about local businesses, especially black-owned ones. Serena's eyes narrowed. Have they threatened you? Tom hesitated before nodding. They said times are changing and places like this need protection. I've seen others pay them off. I just want to live in peace, but they won't let us. Serena's jaw clenched. Riverwood Falls had always been a peaceful community, but now it was under siege by fear and coercion. The Ironclaw MC's tactics were familiar: extort, intimidate, and dominate. She'd seen it in war zones, and she knew the damage it could inflict. What about the police? She asked, though she suspected the answer. Tom shook his head. Sheriff Dawson turns a blind eye. He says they don't have the resources to handle minor vandalism. But I've seen him talking to those bikers. There's something shady going on. Serena absorbed the information, her mind racing. The gang's influence wasn't limited to petty crime. They had connections, likely within law enforcement and beyond. They're not just after money, Tom added. They've been talking about the harbor. I think they're using it for something bigger. Serena frowned. The Riverwood Falls Harbor, once the town's lifeblood, had fallen into disuse. If the gang was operating there, it could mean smuggling or other illegal activities. Tom's voice trembled as he continued. Serena, I don't know who you were before you came here, but I think you're the only one who can do something. We have no one else. Serena met his gaze, seeing both hope and fear. She had sought peace in Riverwood Falls, but it seemed fate had other plans. The weight of responsibility settled on her shoulders. I'll do what I can, she promised. But I need more information. As Serena left the store, the bikers were gone, but the tension lingered. She drove through the quiet streets of Riverwood Falls, taking in the signs of decline. Broken windows remained unrepaired, and faded signs hung neglected. The town bore the scars of fear. She pulled into her apartment complex, the salty sea breeze carrying the weight of the town's unspoken struggles. Sitting in her car, Serena reflected on the challenges ahead. The Ironclaw MC wasn't just a gang. They embodied a system of oppression rooted in fear and division. Serena knew the fight wouldn't be easy. But as she stepped out of her car, the resolve in her heart burned brighter. The town might be shrouded in darkness, but she was determined to reignite its light. The battle for Riverwood Falls had only just begun. Memories long buried surged to the forefront of Serena Johnson's mind as she parked her car. The weight of past injustices hung heavily on her shoulders, the pain of her youth revisiting her with a force she hadn't anticipated. Serena had grown up in Southwood, a neighborhood on the outskirts of a bustling city, where opportunities were sparse, and hope seemed a distant dream. Her parents, Charles and Lucille, had owned a small grocery store, a beacon of unity in their community, where neighbors gathered to share their joys, sorrows, and struggles. She vividly remembered the warmth of those moments, the smell of fresh produce, and the laughter of familiar faces. But those happy memories were overshadowed by the day the bank took it all away. Her parents couldn't keep up with the exorbitant interest rates on their loan, a loan with terms far more punitive than those offered to white-owned businesses in the same area. She recalled the despair etched into her father's face as he locked the store's doors for the final time. They don't want us to succeed, Serena, her father had said bitterly. They want to keep us at the bottom. Those words stuck with her, carving a resolve that shaped her future decisions. Joining the military had seemed like a way out, a path to break free from the chains of systemic oppression. But the harsh realities of the world followed her into the ranks. Despite her exceptional performance, she was passed over for promotions, assigned the most dangerous missions, and constantly forced to prove her worth in a system that refused to see it. The most harrowing experience came during a mission in Baghdad. What was supposed to be a routine reconnaissance turned into a nightmare. Her unit walked straight into an ambush. Gunfire echoed around them, dust and smoke clouding their vision. The desperate screams of her comrades still haunted her dreams, none more so than the final cries of Marcus Green, her closest friend. Later, Serena discovered the betrayal. High-ranking officials had sent them into danger to cover their tracks, sacrificing lives for their own gain. The bitterness of that betrayal never left her. It festered, simmering just below the surface, waiting for a reason to ignite. Back in her modest apartment, Serena sat at her desk, the soft glow of a desk lamp illuminating the pages of her notebook. She jotted down everything she knew about Riverwood Falls, the bikers, the threats, the targeted businesses, and the harbor. Each clue connected like pieces of a puzzle, revealing a larger picture. Ironclaw MC wasn't just a local gang, they were part of a more extensive network. Serena knew gangs like Ironclaw didn't operate with such impunity on their own. They had to have powerful backers. As she pored over public records and financial reports, a name surfaced: Adrian Blackwood. A wealthy businessman with a polished reputation for urban development projects, but beneath the surface, he was a puppet master. His shell companies funneled money into communities like Riverwood Falls, not to help, but to exploit. Blackwood was systematically taking over infrastructure in predominantly black communities, turning them into hubs of criminal activity. Her investigation led her to Project Harbinger, a chilling plan to economically dominate black communities, using fear and criminality to ensure control. Ironclaw MC was just one cog in his vast machine. As the night deepened, Serena decided to visit the harbor. She parked in a discreet spot and watched the comings and goings from the shadows. A young man approached her car, his figure silhouetted by the streetlights. Instinctively, her hand went to the Glock hidden in her jacket. "Relax," the man said, raising his hands in a gesture of peace. "I'm not here to cause trouble." Serena's eyes narrowed as she studied him. He looked like one of the Ironclaw members, his leather jacket adorned with their emblem, but his demeanor was different, nervous, almost desperate. "You're the one who confronted Jake and the others at the gas station," he said, his voice hushed. "My name's Danny. I need to talk." "Why should I trust you?" Serena asked, her tone icy. Danny glanced around, as if ensuring they weren't being watched. "I don't want to be part of this gang. I was forced into it, but I've seen what they're doing. It's wrong. And I know you're trying to stop them." Serena remained skeptical. "How do you think you can help me?" "I know where they keep important documents," Danny whispered. "You need to know what's really going on at the harbor. I can show you." The sincerity in his voice gave Serena pause. He was terrified, not just of her, but of the gang he was trying to escape. "Fine," she said after a moment. "You have one chance to prove you're not lying." "I won't betray you," Danny said quickly. "I want out of this, too." Back at her apartment, Serena sat with Danny as he laid out what he knew. He spoke of secret meetings, mysterious shipments at the harbor, and a hidden cache of documents that could expose the gang's operations. His knowledge aligned too well with what she had already uncovered. "We'll verify everything you've told me," Serena said sternly. "If it checks out, you'll have a chance to make things right. If not, I understand," Danny interrupted, a look of determination crossing his face. The following morning, Serena visited local businesses in Riverwood Falls, starting with Jared's auto shop. Jared was a tall, stoic man who ran the only black-owned repair shop in town. The signs of vandalism were evident. Broken windows, slashed tires, but Jared kept his head held high. "They think they can scare us," Jared said as he fixed a car's engine. "But we've been through worse." Serena nodded. "I'm not going to let them destroy this town. We have to stand together." Her next stop was Mrs. Harris' restaurant. The elderly woman greeted Serena with a weary smile. "We've been here for decades," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. "They won't drive us out." But Serena could see the fear in her eyes. It wasn't just about losing their livelihoods, it was about the safety of their families. That evening, Serena met with a small group of business owners in a quiet corner of the town. "We need to take back control," she said, her voice firm. "We can't let fear rule us." The group listened intently as she shared her plan to expose Ironclaw and their backers. They weren't just fighting a gang, they were challenging a system designed to oppress them. As Serena spoke, a sense of hope filled the room. The people of Riverwood Falls had been beaten down, but they weren't broken. They were ready to fight back. The engine of Jared's auto shop hummed softly in the background as Serena walked in, her boots scuffing against the oil-streaked floor. Jared was bent over the hood of an old sedan, the sleeves of his work shirt rolled up, his hands greasy from a day of hard labor. The tension in the air was palpable. He barely looked up as she approached, his expression worn with the weight of countless hardships. "Hey, Jared," Serena said, her voice steady yet warm, trying to break through the invisible wall between them. Jared straightened up, wiping his hands on a rag, his gaze meeting hers with a mix of curiosity and weariness. "You're the new person in town, right?" he asked, his voice gruff. "Heard you made a bit of a splash with those bikers last night." Serena nodded, standing her ground. "That's right. I'm here to help. Trying to do something to stop them." Jared let out a bitter chuckle, shaking his head. "And what do you think you can do?" he asked, his voice laced with cynicism. "Those guys aren't amateurs. They've been terrorizing this town for years. They've ruined lives, including mine. And the cops, they won't lift a finger. You're just one person, and they've got an entire system backing them." Serena could hear the anger and despair in Jared's voice, a deep-seated frustration that had built up over time. She understood it all too well. The weight of oppression, the helplessness of watching your world crumble around you. But she wasn't here to back down. She had faced worse before. I know they're powerful, she said, meeting Jared's gaze directly. But if we don't stand up to them, they'll keep destroying everything we have. I can't do this alone. I need you. I need this community. Together, we can fight back. Jared stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, without a word, he turned back to the car he was working on, resuming his task. Serena knew she couldn't force him to join her cause. Change wouldn't come easily. But she saw a flicker of something in his eyes, a spark that hadn't completely died out. When the time came, she hoped he would be ready to act. Her next stop was Mrs. Harris Restaurant, a small, cozy diner that had been a staple in the community for decades. The scent of freshly baked pies wafted through the air as Serena stepped inside. Mrs. Harris, an elderly woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, stood behind the counter, wiping it down with a cloth. Mrs. Harris, Serena greeted, approaching the counter. The older woman looked up, her expression guarded. You're that soldier, she said, her tone neutral but observant. I heard you're stirring things up with Ironclaw. Serena nodded. I'm trying to put an end to their reign of terror. They're not just after money, they want control. If we don't stop them, they'll take everything from this town. Mrs. Harris' gaze hardened. And you think people here don't know that? We're not blind, child. But we're scared. And honestly, they don't trust you. You're a soldier. Part of the system that's exploited us for generations. Why would they believe you're any different? Her words cut deep. Serena had spent her life serving a country that often failed to protect people like her. And now, the very community she sought to defend viewed her with suspicion. But she didn't let the sting show. Instead, she nodded respectfully. I understand, she said. But I'm not here as a soldier. I'm here as someone who's seen what happens when we let fear control us. We can't afford to stay silent. Not anymore. Mrs. Harris studied her for a moment before turning back to her task. Serena took that as her cue to leave. She knew trust had to be earned, not demanded. When she returned to her apartment that evening, something felt off. The door was ajar, the lock twisted as if someone had forced it open. Instinctively, Serena drew her gun, stepping inside cautiously. Her apartment had been ransacked, papers scattered across the floor, furniture overturned. A cold dread settled in her chest as she checked her important files. Some of the documents Danny had provided were missing. Before she could fully process what had happened, she heard the rumble of motorcycles outside. Peeking through the blinds, she saw 3 Ironclaw bikers blocking her driveway. One of them, a burly man with a sneer, called out, "Good evening, soldier. Looks like you've been sticking your nose where it doesn't belong." Serena's grip on her gun tightened. This wasn't a random visit. Someone had tipped them off. They knew what she was doing, and they wanted to stop her. The confrontation was brief but intense. Using her combat training, Serena managed to take down 2 of the bikers, leaving the third to flee in fear. She emerged unscathed but more determined than ever. This was personal now. As she pieced together the events of the day, one name stood out in her mind: Mayor Walter Green. The man who had promised to help her. The man who had publicly condemned Ironclaw. But something didn't add up. Following a hunch, Serena discreetly tailed the mayor, watching as he met with Ironclaw representatives in a private room at an upscale restaurant. Her heart sank as the truth became clear. Walter Green wasn't a savior. He was part of the corruption. The betrayal hit hard, bringing back painful memories of Baghdad, where those in power had sacrificed her and her comrades for their own gain. But instead of letting the betrayal break her, Serena turned her anger into resolve. She spent the night drafting her next move. This wasn't just about stopping Ironclaw anymore. It was about dismantling the entire corrupt network behind them. The next morning, she made a call to an old ally. James Stone Carter, a familiar voice answered. James, Serena said, her voice steady. It's me. I need your help. There was a pause before James replied, Serena Johnson. It's been a long time. Too long, she agreed. But this is urgent. I need you. I need the team. She quickly explained the situation, detailing Ironclaw's presence, Blackwood's involvement, and the broader implications of Project Harbinger. James listened carefully. Project Harbinger, he said, his voice darkening. We've heard whispers of it. Never had enough evidence to act. Are you certain? I'm sure, Serena confirmed. They're destroying this town. And if we don't stop them here, they'll do the same across the country. After a long silence, James finally spoke. We never forgot what happened in Baghdad, Serena. If this is our chance to make things right, we're with you. That afternoon, Serena visited Mrs. Harris again. This time, the older woman greeted her with a knowing look. What do you need? Mrs. Harris asked. Your influence, Serena replied. We need the community to stand together. Mrs. Harris nodded, a spark of determination in her eyes. That evening, she organized a meeting at the local church. Familiar faces filled the room. Jared, local business owners, residents who had all been affected by Ironclaw's reign of terror. Mrs. Harris stood before them, her voice steady and commanding. I know you're scared. So am I. But fear won't save us. Only unity will. Serena Johnson is standing with us. If she can risk her life for this town, why can't we? The room was silent until Jared stepped forward. I'm in, he said firmly. I've lost too much already. It's time we fought back. One by one, others nodded in agreement. The atmosphere shifted from fear to hope. And for the first time, Serena felt she wasn't alone in this fight. Later that night, as the sunset bathed Riverwood Falls in a golden glow, Serena received a message from James. The Freedom Riders were on their way. The battle was just beginning. The battle ahead would be relentless, a storm brewing on the horizon, but for the first time in what felt like forever, Serena had hope. With the community slowly rallying behind her and the promise of reinforcements from her old comrades, the impossible no longer seemed so out of reach. It was no longer just a fight for survival. It was a fight for justice, for dignity, and for the soul of Riverwood Falls. Serena stood before the old, chipped mirror in her modest apartment, adjusting the black suit she had borrowed from a thrift store. The suit wasn't perfect, a bit too loose in the shoulders and a little tight around the waist, but it had an air of authority, of purpose. And that was exactly what she needed tonight. She took a deep breath, smoothing her jacket, and prepared to put her audacious plan into motion, infiltrating Ironclaw MC's secret meeting at the Riverwood Falls Harbor. This wasn't just a gathering of local gang members, it would include representatives from Adrian Blackwood's shell companies and, shockingly, a few local officials. This meeting wasn't just business, it was the key to unlocking the corrupt network that had ensnared her town. As dusk fell, Serena parked her old, battered car far from the harbor to avoid drawing any unwanted attention. She navigated the shadowy streets with caution, each step calculated and deliberate. The large warehouse at the harbor's edge loomed in the distance, its silhouette dark against the water. Dim neon lights flickered, sporadically, casting an eerie glow over the area. The air smelled of cigarette smoke, motor oil, and salt from the sea, a strange mix that somehow felt foreboding. Approaching the entrance, she presented a forged ID crafted by Danny, her ever-resourceful ally. The name on the card wasn't hers, but the backstory they'd concocted was airtight, a potential investor interested in Blackwood's small-town development projects. The tall, scar-faced biker at the door scrutinized her ID, his gaze lingering on her face a little too long for comfort. Investor. Huh, he muttered, his voice rough like gravel. What's a lady like you doing in a place like this? Serena held his gaze without flinching. Business, she said curtly, with just the right amount of impatience. Are you going to let me in, or should I report back that your organization isn't interested in expanding? The biker grunted, still eyeing her suspiciously, but he nodded and stepped aside. Go on in. But stay where I can see you. Inside, the warehouse was a hive of activity. Men and women clad in leather jackets bearing the Ironclaw emblem moved about with purpose. The atmosphere was tense, charged with anticipation. At the center of the room stood a large table cluttered with maps, documents, and photographs. Serena kept her movements subtle, observing without drawing attention to herself. A commanding voice cut through the murmur of conversations. Everyone, gather around. Jake, the same man Serena had confronted at the gas station, stood at the head of the table. His presence was commanding, his voice filled with authority that demanded attention. "We need to make sure all the containers are checked and sealed before Blackwood arrives," Jake instructed, pointing to a detailed map of the harbor. "Any screw-ups, and the whole operation's compromised. You all know what's at stake." Serena edged closer, listening intently. The mention of Blackwood piqued her interest. The shipment they were discussing wasn't just weapons, it included crucial documents and a list of bribed officials. That list could be the key to exposing the entire operation. As the meeting continued, the warehouse door swung open with a loud creak, and a new figure entered. The air in the room shifted, tension rising as Victor Crane, a high-ranking figure in Blackwood's network, made his way to the table. Flanked by 2 bodyguards, he exuded authority and menace. "Blackwood wants assurance that everything is in place," Victor said, his tone calm but commanding. "He won't tolerate any failures. Not after the recent troubles in town." Victor placed a briefcase on the table and opened it, revealing an array of documents and communication devices. Serena leaned slightly to get a better view, her heart pounding as she spotted a familiar logo on one of the papers, the Harbinger logo. This was the proof she needed. A direct link between Blackwood and the sinister project that had been threatening Riverwood Falls. As she discreetly activated the small device hidden in her jacket pocket to capture images of the documents, a sharp voice rang out from behind her. "You there?" Jake's voice cut through the noise, angry and suspicious. "Who are you?" The entire room seemed to freeze. Serena turned slowly, keeping her expression neutral, but her mind raced. "I already told you," she said evenly. "I'm here to assess an investment opportunity. But if you'd rather I leave." "No," Jake interrupted, stepping closer, his eyes narrowing. "I don't remember your name being on the list." "Search her." 2 bikers lunged toward Serena, but she was faster. She grabbed a nearby chair and swung it into one of them, knocking him off balance. She pivoted, using the chair to sweep the legs out from under the second attacker. The commotion drew everyone's attention, and Serena seized the opportunity to bolt for the exit. Shoving open the warehouse door, she sprinted into the night, her heart pounding. The shouts of angry bikers and the roar of motorcycle engines echoed behind her as she navigated the maze of shipping containers. She moved quickly, using the shadows to her advantage, but her pursuers were relentless. Just as she reached a dead end, a small truck screeched to a halt in front of her, blocking the bikers' path. "Get in," Danny shouted from the driver's seat. Without hesitation, Serena jumped into the truck, and Danny floored the gas pedal. The tires screeched on the wet pavement as they sped away, leaving the furious bikers behind. Once they were a safe distance from the harbor, Serena turned to Danny, still catching her breath. "How did you know I was there?" Danny shrugged, a faint smile on his lips. "I overheard them talking about the meeting. I figured you wouldn't miss that chance." Serena looked at him with gratitude. "You just saved my life." She pulled out the images she had captured. "But we're not done yet. I found what we needed. Evidence linking Blackwood to Harbinger." Danny nodded, his expression turning serious. "I'm with you until the end." Serena clenched her fists, her eyes burning with determination. "Then it's time to finish this." Meanwhile, in a private conference room at a luxury hotel near the harbor, Marcus Ville, Blackwood's head of security, stood in front of a desk, reviewing surveillance footage from the meeting. Marcus was a man not easily shaken, a former mercenary with battlefield experience across the globe. But something about Serena unsettled him. Blackwood entered the room, his presence commanding. "What's troubling you, Marcus?" Marcus pointed at the screen, his gaze fixed on Serena's image. "That woman. She's too bold. She moves like someone who's been trained. She's not like anyone we've faced before." Blackwood poured himself a glass of whiskey, unfazed. "So what? We have an entire network at our disposal. She's just one person." Marcus frowned. "But don't you see? Her confidence, the way she fights, something doesn't add up." Blackwood took a slow sip, his eyes cold and calculating. "Don't let one woman distract you. All that matters is protecting the list. Nothing else is important." Serena flipped through the pages of the briefcase with growing dread. Her eyes froze on a detail that made her heart stop. The list wasn't just a record of bribed local officials, it named high-ranking government figures, people whose decisions shaped the nation. Names she recognized: senators, military leaders, corporate heads, were all tied to Blackwood's network. No way, she whispered, her hands trembling as she turned the pages. Her breath caught in her throat when she saw a section titled, Operation Baghdad. Memories flooded back, unrelenting and painful. The dark streets, the sudden ambush, her team's desperate last stand, the moment that changed her life forever. Her eyes scanned the document, and there it was. Direct evidence that the mission had been ordered by people they thought were allies. Those names were now in front of her, spelled out in ink. They had orchestrated the ambush, trading her team's lives for control of secret arms routes. They sold us out, she muttered, the weight of betrayal pressing down on her chest. Blackwood wasn't just running a criminal network, he had been pulling strings at the highest levels for years. Her fingers tightened on the edge of the page, knuckles whitening. Serena, Danny called from across the room, snapping her out of her thoughts. He was hunched over her old computer, a relic from a bygone era, but one he had managed to coax back to life. This thing's up and running again. We can upload the files from the USB you took. She quickly connected the device, her mind still racing. As the files began to populate the screen, she saw video recordings, documents, and encrypted messages. One video in particular caught her eye. It showed Blackwood in a dimly lit room, seated across from several men in suits. Her heart pounded as she clicked play. We need to eliminate anyone who might leak information. Blackwood's voice came through the speakers, cold and calculating. Baghdad was a perfect example. Morgan's team. We dealt with them, and no one asked questions. Serena's fists clenched, her nails digging into her palms. Her mind reeled as the implications sank in. He sold out my team, she said through gritted teeth, her voice trembling with barely contained rage. He orchestrated the whole thing. Danny glanced at her, concern etched on his face. Serena, this isn't just about Riverwood Falls anymore. No, she said, her voice steadying as her resolve hardened. It's about justice. It's about every life he's destroyed. Danny nodded, his expression serious. We have everything we need. But how do we get it out? They'll try to cover their tracks the moment they sense something's wrong. Serena took a deep breath. We're going to make the world see the truth. And I'm going to make Blackwood pay. Not just for Baghdad, but for everything. Dark storm clouds gathered over Riverwood Falls, casting a foreboding shadow over the town. Serena stood in front of the gathered townspeople, their faces reflecting a mix of fear and determination. From seasoned freedom riders to the newly united townsfolk, everyone knew the stakes. This isn't just a fight for Riverwood Falls, Serena declared, her voice rising above the distant rumble of thunder. This is a fight for freedom. To prove they can't destroy us. To prove we're stronger together. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. James Stone Carter stepped forward from the group, holding a rifle. He handed it to Serena without a word. His gesture spoke volumes. You won't fight this alone, he said. Serena took the weapon, a faint smile of gratitude crossing her lips. Deep down, she knew the battle ahead would demand sacrifices, but she also knew she wasn't alone. As rain began to fall in heavy sheets, Serena led the strike team toward the harbor. The dim glow of container lights and looming warehouses created an eerie scene. They moved with precision, using the rain and darkness to their advantage. Danny and Marcus Green, a longtime freedom rider, flanked her. Stick to the plan, Serena reminded them. We hit the command center, secure the list, and get out before they realize what's happening. Behind them, the townsfolk split into smaller groups to execute distractions. Their efforts were critical to keeping Ironclaw's forces scattered. The roar of motorcycle engines echoed through the harbor as Ironclaw members mobilized, weapons drawn. But Serena's team moved swiftly and silently, slipping past the front lines. Inside the main warehouse, Serena and her core team entered through a side door. The interior was a maze of crates and machinery, but they navigated it with practiced ease. The command room lay ahead, its glow visible through a narrow window. We don't have much time, Marcus whispered, his voice tense. They'll realize we're here soon. Serena nodded, her eyes locked on the command room door. Let's move. Suddenly, gunfire erupted from above. They had been spotted. Ironclaw reinforcements poured in from a mezzanine, their weapons blazing. Serena's team returned fire, using the crates for cover. In the chaos, Marcus Green was hit. Marcus. Serena rushed to his side, dragging him into cover. Blood seeped from a wound in his chest. Marcus chuckled weakly. Don't worry about me, Serena. You have to keep going. Destroy it all. Serena's heart ached, but she knew he was right. She gripped his hand tightly. Your sacrifice won't be in vain. With tears threatening to fall, Serena pressed on, leading her team deeper into the command room. The air was thick with tension. Inside, Blackwood stood at the center, orchestrating operations with Victor Crane at his side. Protect the list at all costs, Blackwood barked. If we lose it, we lose everything. Serena stepped into the room, her gun trained on Blackwood. It's over, Blackwood. He turned, surprise flickering across his face before being replaced by a sneer. Serena Johnson. I've heard of you. Victor Crane reached for his weapon, but Serena was faster. She shot him in the hand, sending his gun clattering to the floor. Where's the list? Serena demanded. Blackwood smirked, though his eyes betrayed fear. Do you really think you can win this? Power is bigger than you, bigger than this town. No matter how big it is, Serena replied, her voice steady, it will fall. Before Blackwood could respond, the door burst open. Marcus Ville entered, shoving Jared in front of him, hands bound. I think you should reconsider, Marcus Ville said, pressing a gun to Jared's temple. You can either save your friend or take the list. You can't do both. Serena's heart raced. She glanced between Jared and the briefcase holding the list. Time ticked away, and Marcus Ville pressed the gun harder against Jared's head. In a split second, Serena made her choice. She fired at the control console, destroying Blackwood's communication system, then lunged at Marcus Ville. Disarming him, she freed Jared. Run, she shouted. Jared didn't hesitate, bolting for the exit. Serena turned back to face Blackwood, who scrambled for the briefcase. It's over, Serena said again, stepping forward. Outside, the Freedom Riders and townspeople fought valiantly. The rain poured relentlessly, mixing with the blood and sweat of battle. But the people of Riverwood Falls didn't waver. They held the line, their unity and determination pushing Ironclaw to the brink. As Serena closed in on Blackwood, the final confrontation loomed. Rain Blackwood offered a faint smirk, raising his hand slowly in a placating gesture. You don't know what you're up against, Serena, he said, his voice calm but laced with menace. Oh, I know more than you think, Serena replied, stepping forward. Baghdad wasn't an accident. It was part of your plan, wasn't it? Everything revolves around that list. Blackwood froze at the mention of the list. He tried to mask his unease, but Serena saw she had struck a nerve. Baghdad, Blackwood repeated, his voice lowering. I thought you died with your team there. Serena felt anger rise within her, but she kept herself composed. You sold my team out. You knew we'd be ambushed, and you let it happen to protect your network. Blackwood sighed, a cold smile spreading across his face. You don't understand. Baghdad wasn't just a mission, it was an experiment. We needed to see if a team of soldiers could be eliminated without raising suspicion. And clearly, it worked. But do you know why I did it? Serena's gaze remained fixed on him, her expression unwavering. Blackwood continued, his tone more reflective now. It all started when I was just a small-time investor drawn into the political game. I saw who pulls the strings in this system. And I learned that only those who play by their rules survive. Baghdad wasn't my idea. It came from those above me, the ones who run the world from the shadows. I'm just a small cog. If I hadn't complied, I would have been the one sacrificed. Serena's blood boiled. You murdered people you were supposed to protect just to test your theories. Blackwood shook his head, his tone condescending. You're so naive. This entire system runs on sacrifice. A few pawns are removed to preserve the bigger game. Baghdad, Harbinger, they're all just steps in the power play. Serena didn't let him continue. She pulled out the USB drive she had taken from Victor Crane's briefcase and inserted it into the command room's communication terminal. The large screen lit up, displaying the detailed list. Officials involved in Project Harbinger, names of government, military, and corporate figures, smuggling routes, ports and pathways used to transport illegal weapons and goods, corruption evidence, bribe payments, secret contracts, and documents proving collusion. Blackwood's composure faltered as the list illuminated the room. You think this will change anything? He asked, trying to maintain his arrogance. You'll see, Serena replied with a defiant smile. She signaled to Danny, who was waiting outside, to transmit the entire database through the Freedom Riders network. Within minutes, the list was sent to major media outlets and anti-corruption organizations across the country. At newsrooms nationwide, journalists received the explosive information and began analyzing it immediately. Within an hour, breaking news reports hit the airwaves, exposing the horrifying scale of Project Harbinger. Across the country, people were stunned to learn that corruption and racial injustice had infiltrated the government and military at the highest levels. Protests erupted almost immediately, and public pressure forced several officials to resign or face arrest that very night. Back in the command room, Blackwood stared at the screen, his face drained of color. The arrogance he once displayed was gone. You've lost, Serena said, her voice cold. What you did in Baghdad, Riverwood Falls, and all those other towns has been exposed. There's nowhere left to hide. Blackwood turned to her, his eyes wild with desperation. You think you've won. This system is bigger than any of us. I'm just a small part of it. You can't destroy it all. Maybe not, Serena replied, but I just took everything from you. As she finished speaking, the wail of police sirens filled the air outside. Federal task forces, activated by the leaked data and public outcry, had arrived to arrest Blackwood. As the agents led him away, Serena stood silently by the window. The rain continued to fall, but it no longer felt oppressive. Outside, the residents of Riverwood Falls stood together, many spilling into the streets to cheer their collective victory. James Stone Carter stepped up beside her. We did it, he said, his voice a mix of relief and lingering caution. This is just the beginning, Serena replied. There's still so much to do. But today, we showed the world that no power lasts forever if we stand united. She looked up at the sky, where the last flashes of lightning illuminated the horizon as the storm began to dissipate. In her heart, Serena knew this battle wasn't just a victory for Riverwood Falls, but a beacon of hope for all who had been oppressed. When the rain finally stopped, Serena sat in the small room beneath Tom Willis's gas station, her eyes fixed on the computer screen in front of her. News about the leaked list had shaken the nation, but she knew this was just the beginning. The forces Blackwood served would not give up easily. An encrypted message from James Stone Carter appeared on the screen. They're striking back. Be ready. Serena took a deep breath, knowing the real storm was yet to come. Just hours after the list was published, government officials began appearing on media outlets, claiming the information was fabricated. A senior spokesperson declared, "This list is the work of hostile actors seeking to undermine public trust in our government and military." Major media outlets, under government influence, started retracting their initial reports, replacing them with statements dismissing the list's authenticity. Worse still, task forces operating under the guise of national security began targeting those involved in releasing the information. Serena received word from Danny that several members of the Freedom Riders had been arrested, and smaller communities were being threatened into silence. Serena quickly became the primary target of the system. An alert was sent to all law enforcement agencies describing her as the mastermind of an anti-government conspiracy. Meanwhile, Marcus Ville, who had once served under Blackwood, secretly collaborated with high-ranking officials to restore parts of the Harbinger network. Using his expertise and connections, he methodically tracked Serena, tightening the noose around her. Knowing she couldn't face them head-on, Serena, along with Danny and Stone, moved from community to community, using the relationships they had built to evade capture and spread the truth. But Serena wasn't just running. She turned the hunt into an opportunity. In every community she visited, she held secret meetings to explain the true contents of the list. Videos and documents from her USB drive were shared through unofficial channels, online forums, community groups, and nonprofit organizations. The townspeople, once paralyzed by fear of Ironclaw, began to rise. They didn't just share information. They organized protests, demanding a full investigation into the allegations. This isn't just about Riverwood Falls, Serena said during a meeting at a small church. This is about fighting for everyone who has been crushed by corruption and racism. If they want to come after me, I won't hide. I'll stand here and fight with you. While the government tried to suppress the list, Serena's network sparked a movement. Stone and the remaining Freedom Riders not only protected her but also helped organize online seminars where independent experts verified the list's authenticity. In one small town, a black mother spoke tearfully at a protest. "They think they can bury the truth, but they can't bury what happened to my son, what happened to our community. Serena has given us a chance to speak out, and we won't stay silent." The officials' cover-up efforts began to backfire. The more information was taken down, the more people grew curious, sharing it even wider. The leaked documents were no longer isolated fragments, they became the foundation of a nationwide movement. Marcus Ville, sensing the growing chaos, urged his allies that silencing Serena and her team was the only way to salvage the situation. Yet even he began to see cracks forming in the system he served. Serena and her team now fought not just for the truth but against a system desperate to protect itself. Every step was fraught with danger, but retreat was not an option. "We've come this far," Serena told Stone and Danny as they prepared for the next phase. "We can't let them regain control. We have to see this through." And so, Serena Johnson's journey with the Freedom Riders continued. They knew the fight for justice was far from over. But as long as there were people willing to rise against oppression, there was hope. And that hope would light the way for all who sought freedom.